Hey y'all, everybody's favorite but hang on, wait a damn minute. Ha, so much better. Anyway, like I was saying, everybody's favorite bumpkin here. Welcome back to a Thursday night edition of Ramblin' Park with Mike Cletus, the ZX11 Ninja here. That god awful buzzing noise that you guys were so painfully exposed to there for the first few seconds of this video, I apologize for that. That's the new sonic cleaner that I got running over here in the corner of the shop. Hang on one second, I'll show you guys, okay? Now, if you're sensitive to loud noises, buzzing, stuff like that, or just, annoying noises that pretty much make you want to take a screwdriver and, just end it all, you go ahead and mute your video right now, okay? And then we can figure it out with hand signal. I can't do that, okay? I can't. But let me show you what this does and how it looks like whenever these things are cooking in the ultrasonic after I've got them out of the blast cabinet. Da-da-da-da. It's soup. All right. Loud, annoying, buzzy noises in 3, 2, 1. Told you. Yeah, it's loud. Yeah, it's annoying. Trust me, I've been listening to this for the past couple of nights for a couple hours at a stretch. Yeah, it'll make you want to, go take a toaster bath. All right, it's safe to turn your volume. Wait. How's that? Okay. But hey, y'all know me. I'm making this up as I go. Okay. But that is the god awful buzzing noise. It sounds like you're being chased by an army of tattoo guns all around the shop whenever this thing's running. Needless to say, here in the very near future, I'm going to be building an enclosure with, probably some styrofoam or something like that I can put that thing in. That way I can mitigate some of the sound because, man, I tell you what, that's bad, real bad. And about the only way I've been coping with it here the past couple of nights since I've been running this thing out here is I'll usually take my earbuds and stick them in and I'll crank up an audio book or some good tunes or something like that and then just do my thing. Now, we're not going to get into the assembly on the carbs in this video, but there was things that I found in these carbs, and I'll point them out one by one as we go whenever we pick up on the carburetors on this thing in our next installment. But needless to say, well, there's a relative term here for it. Yeah, somebody fucked the peanut butter on these carbs. Pretty bad. Like, bad. Anyway, so what we're looking at tonight, two things. Yeah, two. Number one, we're going to fix the cam timing in this thing. Number two, dose. Number two, I'm going to show you guys how you go about setting up a manual cam chain tensioner if you've got a bike where you're converting away from an automatic cam chain tensioner or a hydraulically assisted cam chain tensioner. I prefer the manuals because once you get your head wrapped around the concept of how they work and how they behave and what you have to do to adjust them, it's very low maintenance. I mean, this will literally add 2 to 5 minutes on average for your normal maintenance whenever you do your oil changes on your bike, okay? But the trade-offs are well worth it in my opinion because when it's installed, it will never move, it will never slacken off, it will never just release all of a sudden to where it throws your cam timing out of whack. And whenever cam timing gets out of whack on most bikes, that's when bad things happen because you have valves that are going up and down like this, and you have pistons that are going up and down like this, and they don't like to cohabitate the same space. So yeah, bad shit happens, and 99.996% of the time, the valve loses. But he don't go down without swinging. So usually whenever a valve gets bent, more than likely you're going to have at least one of them that gets broke off, and it's going to fall down in the cylinder, and then it creates absolute mechanical havoc from there. So trust me, it's money well spent, time well spent. It's cheap insurance. Do it. You won't regret it. Okay, so unfortunately, I don't have one of those fancy, fisheye lenses or something like that for my cheap-ass Amazon video camera. I warned y'all at the start of all this crap, okay? We are a low-budget production here at the Jedi Temple, okay? But that's part of what our mission statement is telling you guys how you can get what you need to get the job done without breaking the bank. So please understand, please bear with me. Now, what I'm going to show you guys is just the basics of how to install one of these things in your bike, regardless of whether you're doing a valve service or not. These are the steps that are going to be more or less universally applicable to most models of motorcycles out there that use this type of cam chain tensioner, okay? Now, a lot of bikes, you can do this without removing the valve cover. However, there is always a risk if you're trying to do it that way. And I really don't recommend you trying to do it like that, because it only takes one time, one slip, one little kick, and you not realize it. And then guess what? You just bought yourself a motor that you didn't want to buy in the first damn place because you already bought it. Yeah, came with the bike. So, everything I'm going to show you guys here is referencing with the valve cover removed, okay? I strongly encourage you guys to spend the time to go through these steps like I'm showing you. That way you can make sure that your cam timing stays where it's supposed to be when you remove the tensioner from the motor and when you reinstall your new tensioner. Okay, this kind of comes back to some of the stuff that we were talking about previously whenever we first got into this bike about checking the valve clearance. But just to kind of cover all of our bases here, I'm going to go ahead and take it from the top with you guys, okay? So step one, get your timing marks aligned. In this case, on this bike, we've got to pull the timer cover off the side of the motor to gain access to it to where we can spin the motor around. I don't have a little window here where I can see my timing mark, so we got to do it old school and we got to pull the cover. There is a timing mark on this thing here on the ignition trigger, and it's marked T1 and 4 because cylinders 1 and cylinder 4 will both be at top dead center at the same time. And you have its alignment mark here on the case. Line those marks up. Now, 90% of the time, you're going to be good with that. But this kind of falls back on that whole concept of trust but verify, okay? While you're rolling the motor over to get to top dead center, number one, make sure you're on your compression stroke. Watch your valves. You're going to have the valve cover off whenever you do this, okay? So, watch your valves. When the cam comes around while you're cranking the motor over, the cam lobes for the intake valves and the exhaust valves, they should be pointing away from each other like this. If they're pointing down, then you're 180 degrees out and you need to roll the motor over again at the crankshaft. Because remember, guys, on a 4-stroke motor, your camshafts up here in the head, they turn at half the rotational speed of the crankshaft. All right? Keep that in mind. That's why I say you're going to be 180 degrees out. It'll be one full rotation on the crankshaft, but it's going to be exactly half a rotation on the camshaft. And that's what we're worried about. So, while you're getting your timing marks lined up and everything, take your pokey stick, brass rod, witness mark, whatever you're using. I'm using a piece of brass tube here because remember, brass is soft and it's not magnetic, okay? So it's not going to scratch anything, it's not going to stick to anything. But take that and drop it down in the spark plug hole for number 1 cylinder, and you can feel as that piston is coming up or traveling down, watch your timing marks, because you'll be able to feel when it stops moving up, and you can watch your mark at the same time. And that way you can verify that your timing mark here on your timing rotor, or whatever the case may be for your particular make and model, make sure that mark is accurate, all right? Doesn't hurt to check it. So I've got this thing rolled over. We're on TDC on the compression stroke on number 1 cylinder. So from this point now, we got to do a little bit of prep work on the cams just to make sure that they don't try to move whenever we pull this tensioner out. Because a lot of times what happens, you've got valve spring pressure pushing up on the lobes of the cams whenever the motor is at top dead center. And keep in mind, you got 4 cylinders that you're having to juggle around with. At least we do in this case. So what may possibly happen, and what can happen on a lot of models, when you pull this tensioner out, when it relieves that pressure that it's applying to the backside of the cam chain and its guide here in the cylinder block, what can happen if you've got valve spring pressure pushing up, it can try to roll the cams in the head and it can make them skip a tooth or two on the cam chain. So that's where this trick comes in handy. I'll show you how to keep that shit from moving around on you. Okay, Now, the best thing that you can have to keep your cams from rolling out of time... Mom! He's doing that thing with his hands again! Hey, gang, until we get this channel big enough to where we can move everything to Pennsylvania, I can grow a big doofy-looking beard and have some goober follow me around all the time with a camera like he's my own personal cheerleader, what we got is what we got, okay? Please bear with me. Anyway, like I was saying, this is a zip tie. This is going to be your best friend as far as focus, behave camera. This is going to be your best friend as far as keeping your cams in time. Right now, we've got this motor rolled over on top dead center. Our marks are lined up. We've verified it by using our indicator here. It's a high-tech fancy word for a piece of brass tube that I keep around specifically for doing stuff like this. But take your zip tie, loop it through one of the holes in your cam sprockets. Now, there's a couple of bikes out there, they don't have holes in the cam sprockets because the cam sprockets get pressed onto the end of the camshafts. Thankfully, those are few and far between, and most of the time, most of those guys ain't looking at putting a manual cam chain tensioner in them anyway, because they usually drop those bikes off at the BMW dealership to have it serviced. But take a zip tie, run it through one of the holes in the cam sprocket, and cinch it down on top of the chain. Do both of them, okay? And if you're worried about them jumping out of place, you got enough room on most of them to where just for double coverage, you can squeeze 2 zip ties in there if you're using sketchy Harbor Freight zip ties, or if you're just really, really, really worried about them coming loose. Okay. So I got our cam chain locked down on the sprocket. There's no way that it's going to come up off there if the cams try to roll. So now, yep, them are tight. There ain't no slack in them. All right, so now I'm going to pull this cam chain tensioner out of the side of the cylinder over here. And I'm going to keep an eye on it while I'm doing that because it may try to move, it may not. I don't know. Every bike's different and every bike's got its quirks. Usually you'll have one bolt on the cam chain tensioner that's out there in the breeze and it's pretty easy to get to. And then you'll have another one that's not so easy to get to. Kind of like on this one here. I got one bolt that's kind of on the inboard side of that cam chain tensioner. Do yourself a favor. Take the shitty bolt out first because that'll help you when you go to take the second bolt out because you can actually control that tensioner as it comes out. Because remember, these are spring loaded. It is going to try to jump out of there after you get the bolts unthreaded all the way. So if you can keep a hand on the thing and not bounce it around and not let it just pop out of there, it's going to reduce your risk of the cams trying to spin on the cam sprockets. So be gentle with it. It's her first time. I'm going to do this real slow and I'm going to try to be real quiet and see if you guys can pick this up on the mic and hear it. But listen for this clicking noise as I back this second bolt out of here. There's one. There's another. Yep, there's another one. And one more. Oh, there was a bunch of them right there. What the hell was that? Hang on a second, I'll show you. What that was your tensioner extending out all the way. How these work is there's a couple of springs underneath this bolt here. And that bolt's sole job is to retain those springs in there to apply pressure here on the plunger. Now, if you look close, yeah, look right here. What that is that's the lock for these itty bitty little teeth on the shaft of that tensioner. And how this thing works, it puts spring pressure out on this plunger, and as the cam chain is trying to push this back, the teeth on that lock engage in the teeth on the shaft here. Now I'm going to pull this thing back, and you can see I can compress that plunger. That ain't a whole hell of a lot of spring pressure, because I'm just barely hooking that thing with my thumbnail right there. And Boom, there you go. That little bitty lock block with that little pissant spring, that is all that is holding your cam chain tension stable. This is why I prefer the manual tensioners, because you don't have this. Here we go, just for comparison's sake, side by side, okay? Here's the stocker, our automatic tensioner. Here's our manual that we're putting in there. And it's very simple how these work. Instead of having a spring and a little lock wedge like this does, this is a glorified bolt. That's all it is. It's threaded into the body that bolts into the side of the cylinder here. This is how you set the tension on the cam chain, by threading that body bolt in and out. After you get your tension set, you take your jam nut and you run it down and you tighten that jam nut against the body of the tensioner. That's what locks the adjustment in place. Now, I had a viewer make a comment on the video where we did the revisit on hen's teeth a few months back, and he's like, well, it seems like you're living awfully dangerous, you know, not having a bolt tightened up all the way on your cam chain tensioner. Well, that's the thing. This is a nut, the same as this nut that locks your adjustment in, but there's a difference. You see that little black spot? What that is that's a roll pin. These are cross drilled, and then they put a roll pin in there to lock that in place. That way you've got something to turn against to set your adjustment. This does nothing for holding the adjustment in place. The jam nut down here that butts up against the body of the tensioner, that's what locks the adjustment in place, and that's what keeps everything where it's supposed to be at. Okay, for you guys watching at home, here's a couple things that you need to watch out for. Whenever you buy one of these cam chain tensioners, most of the time they come with a new gasket. Now, your old gasket, it may come off in one piece, it may come off clean. In this case, it came off about 98% clean. If you look here on the face of the old tensioner, where it butted up on the back side of the cylinder block, you can see where it took a little bit of the gasket material along with it. Not much, but a little bit. Now, the thing is, they're going to give you a new gasket with this thing, and you need to use that. That way you can make sure that you don't have a problem with a gasket that's split or cracked, something like that. You don't want to have oil leaks. Another thing that I prefer to do, although it's not a hard, fast golden rule, on the manual cam chain tensioners, if you look here close, see how they put that little O-ring right there on the shaft on that thing? Now, the idea is this O-ring gets pushed into this groove that's machined around the back side of the tensioner body here by the jam nut whenever you tighten the jam nut up, okay? And in most instances, it's going to work totally fine. But do yourself a favor, take an extra 30 seconds to kind of safeguard yourself against a potential oil leak. Get a little bit of Teflon pipe dope, not tape. Do not use tape. Tape is bad. Tape is evil. You want the liquid Teflon pipe dope. But take a little bit of that Teflon dope and put you just a thin smear of it on the threads here with the extension, with the adjuster bolt backed all the way out, like fully loose. Put a little bit of that Teflon dope here on the threads for about the first half of the threading, because this is going to thread in probably 2/3 of the way by the time you get to where it's actually making contact with that tensioner shoe and putting pressure on the cam chain. But if you put a little bit of Teflon dope here, it's just going to backstop that O-ring, and it's going to keep oil from weeping around the threads and having, you know, the ugly drippies, okay? Because nobody likes a case of the drippies. That's bad. Okay, gang, here's the deal. We got our cams locked down on the cam chain with a couple of strategically placed zip ties, so we know they're not going to move anywhere. We've got our tensioner pulled out of the block on this thing. Now, we got to look at the cleanup side of things, okay? Number one, make sure your gasket surfaces are clean. Now, chances are, your gasket's going to stick to the cylinder block, most likely, if not at least a big portion of it. Make sure you keep that cleaned off. Do what you got to do. Use a scraper, use a razor blade. A couple things I like using that makes life a whole lot easier. These little cheap razor knives, yeah, y'all have seen these. I mean, they're everywhere. They're at Walmart, they're at gas stations, they're at, yeah, well, they're right there by the counter at Harbor Freight because they put them there to make sure that you guys buy them. They're like 40 cents a piece. I usually grab a couple every time I'm in there. These are handy as hell because you can see this one's a little shorter than what it used to be, but it's had a lot of use. Thing is, you can use these for gently shaving a gasket off of a surface, or opening up a box, or digging a sliver out of your finger, you know, whenever you do something like I do and you accidentally reach down and you grab a hold of something and you get stabbed with a splinter. Or what you can do is you can take it, and they've got this little lock that keeps the blade from coming in. Where that blade gets broke off, when it snaps off, that's going to make a nice square surface. Lock the blade in place, and you can put your finger on the back side of it, use it as a guide, and then boom, you got you a scraper that's small enough to where it'll get around all the little nooks and crannies and you can do all the detail work, but it still does a good job. But also on the same page, it's light enough and it's flexible enough to where you can get it in and around in some really inconvenient spaces that you're not going to be able to get a full-size scraper in there in the first damn place. Another thing that works out exceptionally well for the heavier duty stuff, but also this is kind of a multi-role tool as well. This guy. All this is a tool blank of high-speed steel. You know, it's 1/4 inch thick, it's about 6 inches long, it's like 5/8 of an inch wide, something like that. These are sold from various different places. I mean, you can buy them at, well, you can buy them on the world's flea market, eBay. You can get them off Amazon. Or if you got a machine shop in your area or a machine shop supplier in your area, you can go down and you can pick one up, you know, pretty damn cheap. If you buy one of these blanks off Amazon, usually they're, 10, 15 bucks tops, something like that. But they're versatile as hell because, for one, this is tool grade steel. It's high speed steel. So it's tough. It's not going to deform. It's not going to warp. And this is where things get interesting. On these tool blanks, I know it's going to be kind of hard, but let's see if the camera will pick it up on the glare from the lights here. You notice that pattern on there? That's because these tool blanks are Blanchard ground before they're cut up. These are trued and flat surfaces. You can use this as a square. You can use this for checking for surface flatness on a gasket surface. You can use it for checking for warpage on a head, on a cylinder block, on a case cover, blah, 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 blah. The way they make these, all the surfaces on them are relatively square to within 1/1000th of an inch. So that means the edges of them are square here too. And it's fairly sharp because it's tough stuff. These make an exceptionally good scraper because you've got this sharp edge here. It gets on there, but you got enough meat on it, and with it being rigid, it's not going to bend and bow and things like that, so that gives you more control over it. Now, most of the time I don't bother with it, but if I got a lot of heavy duty stuff that I'm doing where I've got to do it by hand and I'm in an area where I can't use like a air grinder or an electric grinder, something like that, with a Scotch-Brite pad or a surface prep disc, if I got to hand scrape it, if I got a lot of it I got to do, I'll take a piece of fuel line and slip over this thing just to act as a handle, just to keep it from beating up the pitties a little bit. Because if you use it long enough, yeah, it'll start getting kind of rough on you. But I've had this one for, yeah, I couldn't tell you how long, okay? It's probably going on 10 years now. But the thing is, I've used it for everything under the sun. I've used this thing as a gasket scraper. I've used it as a straight edge. I've used it as a square. I've used it for checking piston deck height whenever I'm assembling a motor to see how far off from the cylinder deck surface I am by putting a dial indicator on it and using that as a reference base. I mean, the possibilities are pretty much limitless. The only limit that you're going to put on to what you can do with it is the limit that you put on it with your noodle, okay? Don't be afraid to think outside the box. Just to give you guys a heads up on these, like I said, these are tool grade steel. It's tough shit, and it's sharp. So be careful how you handle it. You know, if you have an oopsie or if you slip, you can get a boo-boo out of it, and you may have to go visit the Band-Aid counter, okay? So just, you know, apply a little bit of gray matter to how you're using it. Be careful. Save the pitties. Also, something you need to be cautious about. Again, tool grade steel. Sharp as hell. Tough stuff. If you're scraping aluminum or magnesium, yes, make sure what you're doing, because if you get this cocked off center and you drag that edge of it down there, guess what? You're going to carve a groove into the thing. So just be aware of what you're doing, be observant of what you're doing. Make sure you don't create more work for yourself. I'll put you guys a link down in the description on this video for some of those tool blanks, where you can check them out on Amazon and see if it's something you want to pick up and throw in the toolbox. Trust me, they're invaluable to have around, because I always come up with something new I'm using one for outside of normal machine shop stuff. Oh no, he's doing the hand thing again. Kinda. All right, now we're going to do this as a dry run, because I've still got to pull the cams out of this motor and I've got to fix the cam timing on it, okay? But this will get you guys the info you need to where you can install one of these in your motor and make sure you get it set up right. So you got your gasket surface clean here and everything, and we're going to pretend that we're putting our new gasket in place here on our new tensioner. Now, before you just jump off into the deep end of the pool, take your old tensioner and make sure that the flanges are fairly similar in dimension. Actually, our new tensioner is probably 2 millimeters thinner. Not a big deal. But what you want to watch out for is you want to make sure that your bolts are not going to be going into the hole less than what they originally did, because say this is twice as thick as what your original was. So if you reuse your bolts, what's going to happen, instead of the bolt protruding out that far, it may only protrude out that far. And those 2 or 3 threads that are hanging out there, ain't going to be enough. What's going to happen is it'll pull the aluminum out of the block. So you want to make sure that you've got a similar amount of thread engagement on your fasteners. You may end up having to run out and buy a couple of bolts for them, okay, guys? Now, I can't tell you if you will or you won't. That's just going to be up to y'all, so watch out for it. We're going to take this guy, and we're going to pretend that we put our pipe dope on here like I was talking about. Right there. Put him in there. And we've got that adjuster screw backed all the way out. And yes, we're going to pretend that there's a gasket there, because there will be. Now, usually on a M6 fastener like this, they're going to have a torque spec somewhere in the neighborhood of 85 to 100 inch-pounds, okay? Check your service manual. If you don't have one, just Google whatever your make and model is, like in this instance, 1994 ZX 1100 service manual, PDF free. Plug that into Google and you'll come up with something. I promise you, because they're out there, they're plentiful, they're everywhere. Anyway, from a common sense standpoint, on an M6 bolt, which is 1/4 inch basically for all the Imperial types out there, roughly about 8 to 10 foot-pounds is what your torque spec is going to be, which is realistically just on the heavy side of moderately snug. Let's put it that way. So we got that in. We can crank that in now, right? Wrong. You can't. You got to go up here, and we got to look at our cam chain, how it's laying on the cam. So let me let the bike down and move the camera around a little bit to where I can show you guys what's going on up there. Okay, so we got our tensioner torqued down into the side of the cylinder block, and we still got the adjuster bolt ran all the way out as far as it'll go. A lot of times you're going to be able to take a small flashlight and look down and follow the chain run as it goes down into the cylinder, and you'll be able to see movement there. In this case, I can see it, but I ain't got enough room to get down in there and touch it with anything. So here's what we do. We still got our cam chain locked onto the sprockets with the zip ties, but they do have the potential for moving right now because you don't have any tension applied to the tensioner and the guide here on the back side of the cylinder. So take a wrench, grab a hold of the crankshaft to where the crankshaft isn't going to rotate. Hold the wrench on the crankshaft with one hand. Take your thumb, push down slowly and evenly on that chain run in between the two sprockets. Look hard, guys. Notice how it stayed down there? You ain't got to push it down far. push it down, you know, ½ inch maybe, if that. But see, I got slack now. Let me bring you in a little closer to where you can see what I'm talking about. See right there? Right there. Now normally, this motor has this top guide that sits on top of the cam chain, and what this does is this has a little rubbing block here that keeps that cam chain from whipping up and down, and it keeps the cam chain tension more consistent. Now I've got this removed for the sake of the video, but also I had to remove it because I still got to pull the cams out of this thing and fix the cam timing. We got our slack on our cam chain here that we created by pushing down on it. Now take the adjuster bolt, which you guys can't see right now because, you know, there's a motorcycle motor in the way. But I'm turning this adjuster bolt in with nothing more but my fingers. And I'm going to be turning and turning and turning and turning and turning for a minute. Okay, yeah, bolt's getting hard to turn. So I'm pretty sure that I'm making contact with this tensioner shoe that's on the back side of the cylinder. And that thing's curved. It's like a banana that the back side of the cam chain rides on. And what it does is it pushes that cam chain forward, and that's how it controls slack in the cam chain. Okay, so our timing mark on the crank is still the same. It's not moved because we were holding it in place with a wrench whenever we pushed this down. Now our cam chain tensioner adjustment screw, it's bottomed out now. So now at this point, watch this sag that you created in the cam chain. Now you guys will have to forgive me because I don't have a whole lot of room to swing a wrench in here. So this is going to be a little fiddly and it's going to take me a few minutes. Oop, hey, looky there. It moved. Now I'm turning the adjuster bolt on this tensioner one flat at a time. That's 1/6 of a turn. But watch the cam chain. 1/6 of a turn at a time. But you see how that cam chain is slowly creeping back up and it's regaining its tension? It's still moving, but it ain't as much as what it was. So let's give it 2, 3 more flats. That's half a turn. Still got a little bit of slack here, but not a whole lot. 1, 2. I've got probably maybe, let's call it 1/4 of an inch of free slack up and down in the chain at this point right now. Okay, so we got 1/4 inch of free slack in our cam chain right now with where our adjustment bolt on our tensioner is sitting at. At this point, generally what I will do, I'll go ahead and lock down the jam nut on the tensioner body temporary. I'm not going to fully tighten it yet because we're going to come back to this. But with this minimal amount of play here on the cam chain, a couple of things. Number one, you can safely remove your zip ties here because there's no way that this chain is going to lift off the sprocket enough for it to come out of time at this point. Go ahead and take your zip ties off. Just snug down the jam nut on the tensioner body, and then take your wrench that you had on the crankshaft, turn the crankshaft exactly half a turn. Check your slack again, and don't be afraid to push on it a little bit, and you're probably going to see some wiggle. Now pay attention, because chains do not wear evenly all around their run. You're always going to find a tight spot. Now, you're better off to have a loose spot rather than a tight spot when it comes to a cam chain, because you want to set the cam chain, you got to find a balance point, because if you accidentally set it when it's on the tight spot, it's going to be loose everywhere else and it's going to be noisy. On the flip side, if you have a spot that's significantly looser than everywhere else, and that's where you just happen to land and you set your tension, that chain's going to be tight everywhere else, and it's just going to rapidly wear the chain and the rubbing blocks and the cam chain guides. So a safe bet, start out with 1/4 of an inch of slack up and down, turn the crank half a turn, because that's going to move your cams up here 1/4 of a turn, because remember, we only turn half the speed on the cam that we do on the crank. Check your slack again. Don't be afraid to push and pull on it and give it a good tug. Now, right there, I'm getting a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch out of it, but that's okay. We're still in the ballpark. Turn your crank another half turn, so that's 1 full turn. Check this again. If you're still in the same general vicinity, give it another half a turn on the crank. So that means these have gone through 3/4 of a turn of rotation. Rinse, lather, repeat, check it again. And then finally, give it another half turn on the crank for a final 2 revolutions on the crankshaft, which equals 1 complete revolution here on the cams. Check your timing mark down on the crank again. You should be in the vicinity of top dead center mark. It doesn't have to be exact because we're going to maintain our cam timing at this point. Nothing's going to affect that. What we're looking for right now is proper tensioning on the cam chain. Now, assuming that you've got a similar amount of slack all the way around the run of the cam chain, and don't be surprised if you have a little bit of variance here and there where one spot may be a little looser or a little tighter than the other, no big deal. You just want to make sure that you have some amount of slack at all points. Okay, so from this point moving forward, we're going to put the valve cover back on, hypothetically, because I still have to put the cam timing back in the spec on this one. And there's a small matter, I've still got to build carbs for this bike too. However, on your bike at home, you guys, put your valve cover on, put your plugs back in. If you've got the carbs out, put them back in. Let's get the bike in a state where it will start and run, okay? Before you crank the motor over, double check just to make sure that your jam nut is butted up and secured on the timing chain tensioner. I know this sounds like a long drawn out affair, but trust me, doing it real world, it takes about 12 seconds. It takes me far longer to explain this stuff to you guys on video, so please bear with me and don't get buffaloed by it because it's nowhere near as complex as what it sounds like. Okay, so we got the bike all together. It's ready to run. We can go ahead and start this thing up now. You don't have to let it run for a long time, but let it run long enough to let the idle stabilize. That way, it can idle on its own and not be all chunky, lumpy. If you got a carbureted bike, run it on choke long enough where you can get a little bit of temp in it and get your idle to smooth out. If it's fuel injected bike, yeah, that's pretty much going to take care of itself, okay? So, once you get it up and running, you're probably going to hear the cam chain rattling and chattering just a little bit. That's from that 1/4 inch or so of slack that we left in it whenever we put the valve cover back on. Not a big deal. It's not going to damage anything. Obviously, you wouldn't want to ride the bike with it being like this, but for our purposes here, it's not going to affect anything. Here's how you do your final adjustment. Now, this is a 2-step process, okay? Step 1, when you're idle stable, take a wrench. Oops. Let me put that back down there to where my visual aid is in the right spot. New move. Sorry, guys. So, like I was saying, bike's running, idle stable, all that. Grab a hold of the adjustment bolt on the tensioner, the part with the roll pin in it. Grab a hold of that with your fingers. And then take a wrench and back the jam nut off, just like, say, 2 flats, just enough to where you can turn that adjuster bolt with your hand a little bit. You want to keep a hold of this thing while the bike's running. Once you break this jam nut loose, you'll probably feel that adjuster bolt wiggling and vibrating a little bit. That's from the cam chain running over the cam chain guide. And you're just feeling the vibration from that and the surface noise from the cam chain sliding across its guide. Listen to the sound that the motor makes. You want to turn this thing in 1 flat at a time. That's 1/6 of a turn because it's a hex bolt, 6 sides. Yeah. Turn this in 1 flat at a time until that vibration sensation that you're feeling in your fingers and also the sound that you're hearing out of the motor quietens down. Now, once you get to the point where it's just almost gone or right at where it's gone, stop there, take your wrench, snug your jam nut back down just to hold it in place. Let the bike keep running. Let it go ahead and warm up. Let it come up to operating temp. If you got a liquid-cooled bike, let it run long enough to where the cooling fan on the radiator cycles at least once. That way you know you're at full operating temp. Then, take your wrench again, hold your bolt again, break your jam nut loose, and then back it off very slowly, 1 flat at a time, until you can just hear the cam chain start to be a little bit noisy. Then, turn it in one flat at a time until you just hear the noise go away. That's the point where you want to lock your jam nut down for keepsies, like permanent like. Don't yoink on it like crazy, okay, because you can pull the threads out of it, but make sure that it's tight enough where it's not going to back itself off. The reason you set the cam chain tension with the motor fully up to temp, think about it. Things grow when the motor gets hot and it temps up, okay? Now, is that going to have the cam chain slightly tight when the motor's dead cold? Yeah, about that damn much. And it's only going to be like that for the first 30 seconds or so. But you want to check your cam chain tensioner and then set your adjustment when the motor is up to operating temp. That way, whenever you take off on the bike and you ride for a few miles, that way it doesn't start getting noisy on you, okay? Just make sure you don't over-tension the cam chain tensioner. If you've got any doubts about your tension adjustment, especially when it's hot, again, holding that bolt with your hand, back it out one flat at a time. Use the good old-fashioned Mod 1 Marco ear hole here. Listen for the noise that you're hearing out of the motor. You can also feel for the vibration coming off that cam chain tensioner bolt, but listen for it. Once it starts backing off and getting loose, you'll hear it getting a little buzzy, a little bit rattly. You don't have to use tools for this. Just turn the adjuster bolt in with your fingers until the noise just stops. That's when you reach that happy medium point to where the cam chain is properly tensioned, but it's not overly tensioned. Lock your jam nut down, go on with life. You're done. Now, in the time it took me to explain that to you, you can do it about 5 times over. It is a very simple process. It's very easily done. And this is something that is probably 5 minutes or less of your time whenever you do your oil change service. And yes, you do need to check the tension on it. And occasionally you will have to readjust the tension on it whenever you change your oil. It's not because of the oil, it's because of just typical normal wear in the motor. Now, whenever I'm doing a service on a bike that's got a manual cam chain tensioner in it, what I'll do is I'll take a Sharpie and I'll put a mark on one of the flats of the adjuster bolt. That way I know where I started from. Back that out just a little bit until you hear it getting noisy, and then tighten it up until you hear the noise just go away, and look at where your mark lands. You're not going to move it very much, but a little bit of movement will make a big difference. And there you go, guys. That's pretty much the cut and dried version of how to put a manual cam chain tensioner in your bike, and then how to set it up, and then how to adjust it, okay? Now, there's several bikes out there that are very well known for cam chain failure, or excuse me, cam chain tensioner failure. The first one that I can think of off the top of my head is first and second generation Yamaha R6. That's 99 to 05. Another one is the second gen Honda CBR 600RR from, I want to say it's like from 05 to 08, if memory serves right. Sorry, y'all. Gray hair, a lot of shit in the damn brain case here, so I may be a little bit off target on that. But that's just a couple of examples. Kawasaki 750 Vulcans, Kawasaki 1500 and 1600 Vulcans. You guys out there in the crowd, yeah, you know what happens whenever you get a case of the Rattleys, okay? Now, these guys, they're a hell of a lot cheaper than the OEM tensioners, and also, especially for you 750 Vulcan guys, since you got 4 of the damn things, yeah, it's a lot easier on the pocketbook. So, it's definitely worthwhile spending the money on doing the upgrade. That way, also, at the end of the day, you know damn good and well the thing isn't going to just all of a sudden relax and lose tension on the cam chain and potentially cause you a hell of a lot of problems. Okay, so we've been at this for a little bit now, and I've been playing pretend mechanic. Now I got to turn the video camera off, that way I can play real-time mechanic. I got to get the cams swapped around in this thing and get them timed in right and get all that crap buttoned up, because I got my carbs out of the dip, they're dried off, they're blown out. I want to put those things together because I want to make some motorcycle sounds with this thing. Really, I do. I I want to ride this thing. And, well, let me back up. Let me rephrase. I want to pilot this thing, because that's what you do with a bike like this. Yeah, had a thought, lost it. So anyway, I'm going to get my ass in gear. I'm going to get the cams moved around in this thing, get all that buttoned up, and then I'm going to start putting some carbs together on this thing. And over the next couple of nights, who knows? We might do something a little bit different this coming Monday. We'll see. Till then, remember, I love you guys. Look forward to seeing you guys in the premieres. I'm damn glad for those that continue to show up and show up on the regular. You guys are awesome. All the Patreon members out there, you guys are kick-ass cool, and we could not do this without you guys. And I want you to know that I appreciate that very much. If you haven't been on the Patreon site and you haven't joined up over there to where you can get the access to the JTMJ Discord channel, don't worry. Doesn't cost you nothing. It's free 30 free. Go over there, check it out, hit the link, come over to Discord with us. Let's grow that knowledge base. Let's help enrich one another. Let's help educate one another. Let's help be better for one another, okay? Let's grow the library. Till next trip, guys, remember, I love you. Look forward to seeing you every night whenever we do one of these things. Until I get to see you again, I'll catch you on the flip side. Wait a minute. Y'all didn't think you were going to get off that easy, did you? Come on. I got to put the carbs together on this thing, but whenever I get the carbs together, we're going to touch back on this, and I'm going to show you guys real world, how you go about adjusting this when the bike's running with the tensioner on the bike, okay? Let me play around with a couple of things. If I can get a microphone up there to where you guys can pick up on the engine noise, that'll give you a little bit better example of what I'm talking about, okay? I got to figure it out, but I'll figure it out, and we'll touch back on this real damn soon, okay? Till next time. Yeah.
Force will be with you, always.